Welcome to Fintech Week London, which has been planned for quite some time. A fantastic group of advisors and a whole range of themes that we will explore for the whole week. I thought I'd just begin by explaining some of those themes because you may wonder why we picked them, or equally you may already be very familiar with the things we're going to discuss. Since March 2020, digital transformation has become the critical factor for every business to enable people to work from home and for customers to be served at home. And I talk a lot about a K-curved economy, where the downside of the K is if you are reliant on physical engagement. The upside is if you are in digital engagement. The downside, hospitality, airlines, events like this. Anything that requires face-to-face physical attendance has really hit a downside. It will come back, as I think we've seen during the Euros. But the digital side has really rocketed in the last year. And some companies were ready for it, and some were not. And equally, some have dealt with it, and some have not. By way of example, I deal with a couple of banks that I haven't been able to talk to for a year because their contact centers were offshore. But equally, I've dealt with some banks and fintech companies where I've had fantastic service because their app has worked non-stop brilliantly well. And for me, the difference in digital transformation is between those who are digital natives versus those who are digital immigrants. And I know we talk about this a lot, but if you look at, for example, in the last year, so many big old banks have signed cloud computing contracts. But they've become cloud-based, but they're not cloud native. They haven't actually changed anything in their business model or structure. They've just actually signed a contract to use cloud with a cloud provider. And for me, that is the fundamental difference between the digital organizations on the upside of the K and the physical organizations on the downside of the K. The physical organizations still rely on an old, broken business model of banking that believes you distribute everything through branches with humans, and now they've automated it using cloud and digital technology services. They haven't changed the model of the business at all. And this is a fundamental reason why we're going to see change. We're not going to see banks being disrupted or destroyed or disintermediated. We're just going to see banks being bought. The banks that were broken will be bought by the banks that are not. I talk a lot about banks that are smart with data. To be smart with data, you have to have rationalized, consolidated, and organized your data to leverage it through artificial intelligence. You can't be artificially intelligent if you're done with data. And there's so many banks that are done with data because it's fragmented, silo-based, product-focused, and not customer organized. So lots of themes in there that we will talk about this week. And in particular, I think, what organizations are digital natives, cloud natives? What organizations are really using and leveraging the network today that's available to them today? And many of those are the fintech firms. The fintech firms that, we could talk about all of them, but it's too much time. I mean, 12,000, 14,000 companies now launched. Last year, $5.2 billion invested in fintech is a figure I heard this morning. I don't know if that's the right figure. Whatever the figure is, gazillions of dollars are going into fintech startups because they are digital natives, cloud native companies. My favorite example, because they're one of the biggest, is Stripe. But the reason why they're my favorite example is not because they're the biggest and highest valued, but because of what the Collinson brothers created, which is a company that's a digital cloud native company using open finance through APIs. And when you look at Stripe, why are they so highly valued? Because what they created is beautiful. 7 lines of code when they launched. And the code is art. And this is the nature and the heart of fintech. Code is art. This is what a lot of banks don't get. Code is art. And what I mean by that is that if you design brilliant code as an API or an app or through analytics, then other engineers, other developers, other organizations look at that and go, that is just amazing. That's beautiful. I'll take that. Code is art. And that's what a lot of big banks don't get. They think that their developers and designers and their engineers are just cogs in the machine, not artists. Code is art. So when I look at open banking, I kind of think you need to understand that open banking is all about code is art for digital native organizations that understand the network. And how do you build that code is art network? And it isn't easy, particularly if you're an immigrant, because you don't understand it. But we're getting there. And open banking is gradually changing a lot of the way in which we work. But let's not talk about open banking, because why are we talking about open banking? We should be talking about open commerce, open worlds, open networks, open systems, open everything. If code is art, we shouldn't be talking about open banking because it limits our thinking to banking. And banking is not really what it's all about. When I wake up in the morning, I don't think I want to do banking. I think I want to do business. So open commerce is what we need to focus upon. Linking organizations that are selling and buying goods across the world to the people they're buying and selling from and to. Open commerce is where it's really at. In fact, what I find very interesting around the whole nature of open banking is how little we talk about what about the links to the other people, the whole value chain, the supply chain, the companies that we're trying to sell and buy from and to, and the people they're selling and buying from and to. Why don't we think about the whole ecosystem? And we talk about ecosystems and platforms and networks, and they're blasé terms. But the end of day is that any institution, whether it's a traditional bank or a fintech, is just part of a system that's linking open commerce through the platform between those who are buying and selling. Plain simple. Plain and simple. It's actually not that plain and simple because there's a couple of other factors coming into play which change the game. And in particular, the network is transparent. We have a digital network that is completely transparent. And we may not believe that it's completely transparent, but if you try and do bad stuff, you will get caught by the network. I've seen so many companies that have had bad network coverage. And it doesn't mean that people leave the company and close their accounts or shut down the app, but it does leave a smudge or a black mark. And that's going to be the big theme for the next decade. So when I look to the future, where we're going next is a network that will reveal everything about those who are good and bad players. A completely transparent network that's democratized, distributed, decentralized, networked. And that's going to be one of the biggest influences of how business behaves and people behave in the next decade in this open commerce world. So I'm working right now on a new theme for another book, surprise, surprise, about how can we use digital for good. And I was inspired surprisingly some may say, by a poster that I saw on the wall of Alibaba in Hangzhou, China, that said, what can we do to be good for society and good for the planet? And that's a big driver. How can we use digital for good for society and good for the planet? How can we use digital for good? And there's many, many ways that you can see that clearly. I mean, when you look at, for example, financial inclusion, we can now use digital for good, including everybody in the network, including the 2 billion people who were not served by the financial system before. They can now be served by the financial system because it's digital. And the reason for that is that if you use digital services, it costs nothing to do a 1 cent transaction or a $1 million transaction. So you can include everyone in the network. But it's more than this. It's using digital for good for the climate. And we all know Greta Thunberg, David Attenborough, the climate emergency. Oh. It's not a yawn. It's actually, obviously, one of the most important things for our kids and our grandchildren in the next century. How can we use digital for good for the planet? And I've got lots of examples around this. Arlandsbanken from the Nordic region has a climate index around how every time you buy or sell something, it impacts the planet. Ant Forest with Alipay and Alibaba works out the impact of every time you pay or buy something on the planet. How green is your life can be tracked and traced through the financial system. These are things that I guess culminate for me in what ends up being the most important message, which is companies need to have a purpose. If you don't stand for something, you fall down. What's the purpose of your company? What's the purpose of your life? What's the purpose? And this is really important because it actually will dictate how we behave over the next century, which is to stand for something. And it's not just having cultures and values and marketing. It's actually internalizing it to every member of the organization to understand the impact that you have and how it relates to the purpose of your organization, which is doing good for society and good for the planet, I hope. And purpose-driven banking, purpose-driven structures is going to be one of the big backdrops over this week, along with open banking, open commerce, digital transformation, and digital transparency. And I guess my conclusion is I've grown up in a period that was, I guess, motivated mainly by Milton Friedman's economic model of do whatever you have to do within the law to make a profit. Yeah, I'm summarizing that shortly. Yeah, but it is do whatever you have to do within the law to make a profit. Shareholder capitalism. I think shareholder capitalism in the Milton Friedman model is now dead. The next century, and it's starting right now, is stakeholder capitalism. Do whatever you have to do to make a profit whilst doing good for society and good for the planet. That is the fundamental difference. Purpose-driven businesses focused upon stakeholders, not shareholders. So I could talk a lot more, as most people know, but I'll summarize that this is going to be an amazing week. We're going to talk so much about so many different things, from blockchain to quantum computing to open banking, open commerce, through APIs, analytics, and apps. But the backdrop for me is do good for society and good for the planet. I hope you enjoy the week. Welcome to Fintech Week London.